Hey there, here we are. So I'm excited because we're going to talk a little bit more about what's really involved in waking up out of the trance of being numbed out, and the trance of being numbed out, suppressing our rage and our grief, and what do we do with that? The rage, grief, terror, shame that people who are dealing with healing. And if people are working with psychedelics, they're going to be up against, they're going to come up against, because those protectors get, right, they get dissolved. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in states of underlying shame, grief, rage, terror, right? So you and I, we've been talking about, well, what do we do with this? So let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk a little bit about the program, the Soul Seed program, and how that's the groundwork and how that lays the foundation that allows people to go deep with each other in community. And then what happens in some of these intensive retreats where you're really able to go down deep underneath it and free the system to experience its true nature in its true instincts.
Yeah.
And so that it's not about the trauma, it's about awakening the aliveness and awakening the true nature. With the true nature and aliveness, it's the same thing. We talk about it. Some people call it the higher self. The higher self is a dissociative, I think, right word. But what we're really talking, it's a dissociative. We're like, we have a higher self. We don't have a higher self. We just are the self.
Yeah.
And the multidimensional self is all realms, including this realm. And this realm needs to be freed up in this physical body. So let's talk more about that. Like, what are you doing in terms of, tell us more about how you're working the art piece and the jiu-jitsu, and how that helps people access the deeper levels of rage and shame and terror that are stuck in there, and create numbness and create patterns that are not supportive.
Yeah. So, okay, Jane, so I did want to come back to, so Soul Seed is, in my opinion, the hub, or it's a container to give people an experience of what it's, of safe community, a sense of community aliveness, or a sense of community self, right? And in that, their protectors or their control mechanisms can begin to start to break apart. And so as they come back home into themselves, I kind of almost see it as if it's like astronauts in a rocket and it's coming back to planet Earth, and they're gliding along, and then almost they hit the atmosphere, and it's like, that's what's happening to them as they're trying to get back home. And so I find the intensives are about creating a container to support the rocket and coming back home without exploding and running away. Or, I don't know if that's a good metaphor or not.
Yeah, but what happens in the intensives? Let's talk about that. So, I mean, and also, so there's the foundation that we're creating, right, where people are safe in relationship with each other, and we have actually very specific guidelines that are in place to enable that to happen. Advice giving. We learn how to listen. We learn how to attune to the other. We make space for each person to have their experience. There's no one experience that's better than the other experience, right? So that's the groundwork. So everybody feels safe in the place. And as soon as there's a safety, which many people didn't even have growing up, right? No place to be themselves.
Yeah.
So once that's established, then the defenses begin to relax a little bit. And then all of a sudden, like you said, what's emerging now? What's emerging now is this huge amount of rage, possibly grief. And so let's talk about how we deal with that, because we can't really deal with that in an online group, an online forum, right? But there is other ways to talk about how you've been doing that right now.
Yeah. So I've been using 2 or 3 methods. So I've been having people come here to West Virginia, very rural West Virginia, where we're edgy and backwards. And we are doing a combination of what's called ITR combined with somatic movement, somatic psychology, and I'm blending in martial arts, in particular jiu-jitsu. And we're using those modalities to create sort of a space for people to show up, recognize they've come out of denial, as you said, they're waking up to their rage, their grief, their shame, they're seeing traumas that they never saw were traumas before, and it's like, what do we do with this? And so in the intensives, we use these methods to support a healing of a lot of that flooding and waking up from the denials and treatment of that trauma. So the ITR method, you can look that up online. It's designed by Linda Gaunt. It stands for Instinctual Trauma Response Therapy. You use smelly markers. If you know anything about what I do, you'll know I'm a big smelly marker girl. And we use smelly markers, we use paper and drawings to support telling the story of the traumas in a way in which puts it into the past. It's a very effective, there's tons of studies done on this type of method. And Linda Gaunt's of the theory of it's kind of re-traumatizing to spend years working and titrating through your traumas. So her method she created was one that she felt like, let's do it in a week. Like just hammer through them, get the nervous system and the brain to reorganize itself so it could see it appropriately and then put it into the past. So that's one of the methods I do, which is kind of edgy. It's different than your traditional methods of trauma recovery, but I've just witnessed a lot of success.
Well, so you and I have done some of that together, and I've seen the process of what happens when people are able to tell that story in that holistic way. It's not 1 hour, it's a few hours. People move through the whole thing. Then I love also, though, the way that you bring in the somatic work, so that the somatic is crucial part. So we need to talk about that, because as soon as that story begins to unravel, then we're left with the body that's holding all of that trauma right now. It has to go somewhere. And those trauma actually is a repression of the instincts. That's all it is. So what we're really about is freeing up those instincts in a very real somatic way. So the instincts being the instinct to fight, to flee, to reach, the instinct to freeze and shut down. It's self-preservation. And what we want to do is free all of that up so that we become the full, alive, creative, inflow person that we're meant to be. Right? So say more about how you do that with the work that you've been doing.
Okay. So once you do the RTR method, so again, trauma is like your brain's being blown up and it's like chardonnay, it's like fragments of pieces everywhere. And so the ITR method almost brings your imagery, your sensations, the words, all of the fragments of the trauma, and organizes it in a way in which the system begins to go, oh, I get it. And then once the system says, oh, I get it, and starts to kind of put it in the past, then the underlying somatic response, the instinct, the fight-flight response starts to come up. And so then we need to have a portal for processing that. Now, kids, their way of processing trauma and their way of actually coming alive with instincts is play, right? As adults, we seem to have thrown play away and think that it's not important. But in fact, it is the portal, one of the portals through to embodied aliveness and recovery and a sense of adaptability, neuroception, resiliency. I mean, it's key. It's why if Donald Winnicott, he says that play is a universal language. All animals know it. Why? Why is play a universal language? It's because it is the essence, it is the process at which organisms develop the skill of aliveness, develop the skill of neuroception and being able to track and orient to threats, respond to threats. It's the process at which we come alive with healthy instincts and creativity and self-authorship. So in the trauma world, we tend to want to go slow and bit by bit titrate a lot of our rage. But if you incorporate something like healthy, safe play with physical movement, it can actually speed up our ability to process the underlying rage. because we know that rage is only a byproduct of the pent-up, suppressed fight-flight. Rage wouldn't exist, actually even the fear wouldn't exist, if we were able to mobilize on that fight-flight that's being impinged, right? So you tell the story through the ITR, which frees up the energy. Now you've got to mobilize it and act it out. So one reason why people are so afraid of their rage and then it gets coupled with shame or fear is because rage is about the impulse to kill. It's the impulse to hurt. Well, so where can you actually act that out where you don't have to go into shame or you don't have to go into fear? Well, something like blending martial arts such as jiu-jitsu allows you to do that. You put someone into what's called a guillotine or a chokehold and you pin them to the ground until they quote unquote tap. That allows you to free up that fight flight in a way in which is safe. You get to have fun. It's all giggles. There's this tracking of one another's nonverbal cues to make sure everyone is safe. And so it allows for a healthy environment to not just mobilize the underlying fight flight, the instinct that's being coupled to the rage, but it also allows you to develop the skill of neuroception, develop the skill of healthy, secure attachment, to process your ambivalence with individuals. It can do a lot. If it's done appropriately, you've got to, this is where I feel like I'm creating my own signature somatic movement modality that blends in jiu-jitsu with somatic experiencing, with somatic movement, with John Conger's work, with a bunch of other somatic pioneers in the world, and I'm sort of creating my own signature program.
Yeah, and it's brilliant because it just reminds me of, you know, indigenous cultures where they have ritualized the movement of the warrior, or ritualized grief rituals, right?
Yeah.
Warrior rituals, places where people get to act out their rage and then come back into their normal resilient place, and it's acceptable within the culture, and we're missing that in our culture. So we don't have any place except in destructive ways, or we have to repress it.
Yeah. And
so
big piece there, like I love that word ritualized, right? It's the ritualization that allows for the safe processing of it. And you remove that and people are out of control with the flooding and the rage and the fear and then the shame, and it just gets cycled over and over again.
Right. And we have to move through it. We have to move through it to connecting with our true aliveness, because those instincts are part of our inheritance. It's who our right to be is, to be free, to be empowered. We can't have power if we're repressed and closed down and shut off. We lose our flow, we lose our spontaneity, we lose our creativity, right?
How are we supposed to self-author if we don't feel this energy? It doesn't make any sense. Then we're just a bobblehead up here with all talk and no action. The action is from the mobilization of these of the instincts.
Yes.
And if you look at one last thing, if you look at Carl Jung, he talks about creativity as instinct. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's totally. So, okay. It is. It's totally instinct. I mean, it's like it isn't a mental concept, right? It is a movement in the here and now, one single movement that is inspired, that then moves you to the next thing and moves you to the next thing. And actually, that's how Soul Seed was created. So, okay, so now let's say somebody's interested in actually this experience. They're ready to jump in. So what's their next step? I think their next step is they do need to have the container, right? So they've got to have some form of preparation work and they have to have a community of people that are holding the space. And of course, they don't have to do it through us, but we do provide an amazing 4-month program for people to begin to really to understand what's happening, and how to begin to tell the story, or how to begin to understand their attachment traumas, their developmental traumas, so that they can begin to open up those spaces in a safe container with other people who are doing the same thing, with very specific guidelines to make it safe. And then at some point, people get to then choose if they're ready for this deeper somatic playful event that you, or sometimes you, sometimes the both of us host together. And yeah, but that without the container of the group, without the container of us, you can't just jump into it. You have to have the form of preparation, the holding container, and then you've got to have the integration period afterwards, just as you would do in any set and setting, working with anything.
Yeah, they can come and do an intensive, but I want to know that they've got some level of community that they're going back to, that they've got a therapist, that they understand what IFS is and what the protectors are. And I would almost say I'd also be asking them, would you be willing to go and find yourself a good jiu-jitsu gym that you can continue to build this muscle? It's not a one-time fix.
Right.
Yeah.
So you talk about the jujitsu muscle. I also talk about the ecstatic dance muscle. So anything that's going to engage the body to the body continue to follow its instinctual responses, whether it's through movement, whether it's through jujitsu, so whatever. But the jujitsu is very powerful for activating the rage response, and that's what the rage, which is really power. So that's what we're after. We want people that get back their power. And there's no better way to get back to your power than you've got to go through and access your rage. And there's so much shame and fear around that because of our culture. Okay, so one way for people to get started, we do have so there are some openings in the upcoming program. If you're interested, you can contact me. Otherwise, there will be openings later on down the rest of the year. And you can contact Lisa if you want to engage in this process with her. So all of that information is below. All right. I think this is great and exciting work. Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.